Joining us right now, thrilled, and I'm really honored that we could have him today, is someone with a global perspective. His initial acclaim with the Bush Senior administration on Northern Ireland, Richard Haass, of course, I'm going to say really the reinvigoration of the Council on Foreign Relations. He is with Centerview. Ambassador Haass, thank you for joining us. I think we forget that Seoul, Korea is 35 miles from the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. How does the tension of North Korea and South Korea fold into the shock of government collapse and test in Seoul?
Good question, Tom. Good morning. I think the issue is whether North Korea, which is obviously watching what's going on in South Korea with, say, more than a little interest, whether they see this as a moment of some opportunity. This is, North Korea remains the most militarized country in the world. You've got two large conventional armies arrayed against each other. You still have more than 20,000 American troops there. North Korea obviously also has a missile and a growing nuclear force. So that's the danger here, that they would see this as some a moment of opportunity to exploit. And I would expect and hope that South Korean and U.S. forces would be at a higher level of alert just to try to deter any such thing.
June of 2019, President Trump meets Kim Jong-un. We all remember that moment. What if that happens again? What is a signal to South Korea if the president-elect reduxes June of 2019?
Look, the South Korean relationship with President Donald Trump was one of the worst relations between an American ally and the United States. The president really pushed hard about why wasn't South Korea doing more to pay for U.S. troops there, concerns about the trade imbalance and so forth. So much, and by the way, and threatened to pull U.S. forces out of South Korea. So if he were to once again ratchet up the pressure, I think the most likely reaction would be that South Korea would think very seriously indeed about developing nuclear weapons of its own if it came to lose faith in the United States. And that's the sort of thing that, among other things, could cause a real crisis with China. So there's a lot of potential dynamics here.
Richard, how concerned should the average American be, or the average just observer in the West be, about South Korea? This martial law news over the last couple of days really caught, I think, everybody by surprise. How concerned should we be about the stability of that part of the world?
It did catch everybody by surprise, including everybody in South Korea. The good news is it went nowhere. You had the declaration of martial law. The National Assembly met almost immediately, repudiated, public opinion repudiated it. The president backed down very quickly. So to me, the larger story is a good one about the resilience of South Korean democracy and institutions some 40 plus years since South Korea joined the ranks of the democracy. So I don't think we should be concerned. I actually think the big loser here is President Yoon, and he'll obviously face now an impeachment challenge. And I'm not sure if he survives what he set in motion. He was unpopular before this. He's far more unpopular now.
Right.
He's lost a lot of legitimacy. But I actually think it's a good day for South Korean democracy.
It is not a quiet December. We welcome all of you across the nation. Your morning commute, Bloomberg surveillance. Too much international relations, it seems. We're focused on Paris and, of course, on what we see in Seoul. And with us, Richard Haass. Coming up, Audrey Child-Friedman and the currency markets, and we're looking forward to economic data here in 20 minutes. Paul?
Richard, let's move over to what we're seeing in Ukraine here. Boy, there's so many dynamics here, so many ebbs and flows here with the incoming U.S. administration here. How do you think this is going to play out over the coming months in Ukraine?
Actually, uncharacteristically, and I hope you're all sitting down there, upbeat. I actually think over 2025, while the battlefield will continue, I think attention's going to move to the negotiating table. The person Donald Trump has appointed, Keith Kellogg, retired Army general. He was Mike Pence's national security advisor, but he's been appointed to be the point man for Ukraine and Russia. What he's recently written about the subject, I find incredibly sensible. essentially, first going to Ukraine, saying we'll continue to provide arms, but you've got to be willing to negotiate in good faith and base the negotiation pretty much on a ceasefire in place. And I think the Ukraine government has come around to that, if you listen to what Mr. Zelensky's saying. And then the question is whether they can bring Russia around. But to me, it's all good news. There's a focus on negotiations. No one's talking about throwing Ukraine under the bus. And very quickly, I think the pressure is going to be on Vladimir Putin to meet Ukraine halfway. So I don't think it's crazy optimistic to say in 2025, by the end of that year, say a year from now, we could be seeing real progress diplomatically. I'm actually optimistic about it.
Richard, how would you characterize the relationship today with President-elect Trump and Putin? Is it going to be constructive? Can we move the ball forward on a number of issues? What's that relationship like?
It's the right question. The atmospherics have often been good. The substance, who knows? Look, you've got Ukraine. That'll be probably the first early test. We'll see if Mr. Trump can persuade Putin to dial down his relationship with North Korea. That'll be a second test. A year after Donald Trump resumes his presidency, goes and re-enters the Oval Office, the New START arms control framework is set to expire. So we're going to learn there as well. Can the Trump administration and Putin, can they extend the nuclear arms agreements that have been so central to international stability? So there's any number of issues. So I'm not in the predictions business, and I don't think there's any way of knowing. But we're going to have some pretty early indications, beginning with Ukraine.
Richard Haass, I look at your work with the Council on Foreign Relations and your ability to write prodigiously about this. Let us stop and go back to really an important work. Foreign policy begins at home. How are we doing, Richard Haass? How are we doing in building out our domestic structure to project internationally?
If I were still a professor, I'd give us a pretty low grade. I'm not sure I'd give us a passing grade. We're extraordinarily divided, which makes it increasingly difficult to be consistent and reliable, either for our friends or against our foes. We're also been unsuccessful at tackling many of our domestic challenges. Just take two. One is the border situation. And if people in this country see real problems here at home, they don't have the bandwidth. They don't have the focus on the rest of the world. The other, something you talk a lot about on your program here, which is the deficit and debt. And again, we'll see whether we have the collective will to tackle that. It's interesting, the numbers that have brought down the French government, running a deficit to GDP ratio of about 6% or so. Guess what? That's where we are. And our cumulative debt is essentially now equal to our GDP. Yeah. So we're in serious water. So I think there's real issues about our focus, our political consensus, and also just the resource availability for the United States to play the kind of role in the world that we have for 80 years now, and that I would argue has served us and the world pretty well.
You were a young lad at Obermann. There's a photo out of Paul Sweeney of Barnier. I think he couldn't shave, he was so young, in Pompidou, which harkens back to, folks, 1962 and the collapse of another French government. Richard Haass, a question I asked our Stephen Carroll earlier, should we get ready for a sixth French Republic?
Good question, but the problems to me aren't so much mechanical, Tom, as political. So you have the left and the right voting down the prime minister. And all this comes against the backdrop of, I think, Macron mishandling French politics, calling for snap elections when they are unlikely to result in anything good. But the real question is, what is the left and the right willing to vote for? So the issue is not just Barnier. The issue is not mechanical like it was with the Fourth Republic. The real question to me is do you have a consensus in France to take some difficult decisions about spending, taxation, and the rest? Sounds familiar, I expect. And I don't think that can be fixed mechanically with rewriting the rules of French politics. And you couldn't rewrite the rules in any case quickly enough or get approval of them. There's no figure like a de Gaulle who could ram it through the French political system. So I think we're pretty much stuck with the Fifth Republic.
Thank you so much for the time. Richard Haass, of course, with Centerview Partners. Can't say enough about his work with the Council on Foreign Relations and Foreign Affairs magazine as well.